This week on Hike Hearth Birding, we are exploring how bird behavior shift during migration, from migratory restlessness and hyperphagia to changes in vocalizations and flocking. We'll discuss some of the changes you might see in your local birds this season.
And if you've only got one weekend to get out and bird during migration season, I'll share how to plan your trip for the best possible experience, from targeting the right species to finding the right locations.
Plus, we'll give you the latest updates from our wood duck, bluebird, and tree swallow nest boxes as the season kicks into gear. Let's get to it. So spring migration season is underway, and the peak of it all is right around the corner for those of us here in New England. And this week, I asked Dustin to walk us through the behavioral changes that birds go through at this time of year. So let's dig in. Dustin, what actually triggers a bird to start migrating in the first place? Is it just a matter of temperature, or is there something else at play?
Well, there's a lot of biological processes that come into play, but it's mostly the photoperiod. That is the increasing or decreasing length of day, which triggers some hormonal shifts in migratory birds. These shifts then kick off a range of migratory behaviors. So birds begin to fatten up, eating all they can and shifting their diet from more protein-rich things to more fat-rich things, really in order to support the energy that they're going to need to make the journey. That's a strong indication that a bird's internal clock is gearing up for the trip. So birds then show intense activity at night. Even captive birds do this because they just get restless. Their body wants to go, go, go. In wild birds, it looks like more erratic movement, increased feeding, general antsy behavior, and their calling, or essentially their way of saying to each other, "Let's go," picks up, and birds get antsy talking to each other also.
Okay, so yesterday, Dustin, you were very excited to share with me a special word for the restlessness that birds get when that migratory period hits. Do you want to share that word with our audience?
It is. I love English words that come to us from other languages simply because there is no direct translation. And this word is called Zugenruhe. It's a German word meaning simply migratory restlessness. And I think I feel this at the end of the winter myself. So, right now I'm kind of get some Zugenruhe going.
You sure do.
Anyway, that's a strong indication that a bird's internal clock is ready to go. They get nervous and anxious, and even captive birds show this by flapping, hopping, and fluttering in their cages much more than usual when the Zugenruhe is hitting them. So in wild birds, it looks like more erratic movement, increased feeding, general antsy or agitated behavior, and their rate of calling to each other really picks up. So they're essentially saying, "Let's go, let's go, let's go" to each other until enough of the birds agree and they're off.
Okay, so I've heard that birds get louder around this time as well. Is that true, that they're like doing extra vocalizations and singing their little hearts out?
It is true. Dawn and dusk chatter becomes more noticeable during these transitional light periods when birds become more active and more vocal. It also helps maintain group cohesion and coordinate their departure and arrival moments. So these flight calls happen in a number of different ways. One is often a quick zeep, zeep, or chip, chip sound used during migration. The purpose of this is to sort of just keep generally in contact, especially in the dark, and avoid any collisions if they're, mid-flight. Common species like the Swainson's thrush, bobolinks, American redstarts all exhibit this behavior while they're migrating. And a fun fact, some birders even record these migratory sounds from overhead, and it's called nocturnal migration, or for short, knock-mig sounds. And some birders have like a big parabolic microphone to capture these. I haven't gotten there yet.
I have to say, just to chime in for a second, I know you're going to talk about some more vocalizations, but the more we talk about this topic and share content on this channel, the more I'm realizing that there's thousands of ways that birders actually bird.
Absolutely. And, if you want to go really extreme, my favorite birders of all time are Bill Thompson III and Julie Zickafuss. And when they built their house in Ohio, they actually built a tower so that they could sit up in the tower at night and listen to migratory birds flying overhead during migration times.
So they're into nutmeg.
Big time.
All right. Okay, what else do you have for us when it comes to vocalizations?
So some birds also stay silent during migration, especially shorebirds and waterfowl. The silence for these birds helps them avoid predation over open areas like coastlines or fields, like things like that.
Okay, and so they're clearly behaving different. They're being much more vocal. I assume they're eating differently during this period of time is because they're moving around a lot more, right?
Absolutely. That's called hyperphagia. So birds dramatically increase their food intake before and during migration. They're converting that food to fat reserves, which fuel their long flights. Some species actually increase their body weight 30 to 50% or more. And for example, a ruby-throated hummingbird actually doubles their weight before crossing the Gulf of Mexico.
That's amazing. That's really cool.
Yeah, they simply become laser focused on high fat food sources like berries or insects.
Okay, so there's clearly changes in behavior that we notice, but do birds behave differently around other birds when migration is about to start?
Yeah, even birds that are typically territorial become much more social during migration. They simply know that there's safety in numbers and they want to benefit from that. So you'll see loose flocks. So you'll see this behavior sometimes even in loose flocks. And what I mean by that is a flock that might be mixed among several different species. They start interacting, and sometimes you get large flocks of birds that aren't just one species, but they're migrating together in a huge group. To benefit from that, especially with songbirds like the passerine family, including tanagers and buntings and many warblers.
I love the idea that they're all like commuting together, even though they're different. That's adorable to me. Well, migrating, not commuting, although.
It's a commute of sorts.
Yeah.
And oftentimes, especially after a storm or something, or if there's a boat offshore and the birds need to rest, sometimes the deck of a boat will just get covered with all sorts of different species of birds that are simply looking for, any port in a storm during their migration journey.
Oh, that's sweet.
Yeah, so the benefits of flocking give them the ability to hive mind and share information about food sources or stopover locations along the way. And as I said, safety in numbers, better predator detection and evasion. And, the migration route isn't something every bird might know immediately inherently. They learn it from each other. So those birds that might be migrating northward for the first time are relying on the more experienced birds in the flock to help lead the way.
You've pointed out that some of the early migrants that we are already seeing on our lake are only making pit stops, correct? So most birds are stopping along the journey to rest and kind of regroup before they continue on, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Most species rely on stopover sites. There are some birds that go nonstop from point A to point B, but they're the rare ones. Most species rely heavily on places to rest and refuel. So some of those places need to have certain features. So the first one is rich food sources, right? They want to have a place that they actually can find some more bugs and stuff to eat. They want to look for safe resting spots with low pressure from predators. And this is really important. They need those restover spots to still exist. If they're used to stopping at a place, say on the coast of Florida after they get across the Gulf of Mexico, and they come back and this year it's, a poured concrete foundation for a new hotel or something like that, that is the kind of development that citizen science data like eBird has really helped inform about not just the habitats that birds live in when they're breeding and when they're down south for us in the summertime, but also in the stopover spots and how development has impacted a lot of bird species that way.
Could you give us some examples of stopover habitats, what those usually look like?
Sure. It's all the usual suspects, right? Wetlands, urban parks, coastal forests, estuaries, even cemeteries or landfills. Cemeteries are great because they're well maintained and they're there long term. We don't develop over cemeteries. So many of them are hundreds of years old. Landfills are great for food sources, especially for the scavengers. And of course, lakes for waterfowl are super important. And birds might stop for a few hours or a few days, depending on weather conditions, the condition of their body, if they need to replenish their fat stores, and the habitat quality. Sometimes birds will like a stopover spot so much they might decide to stay and use that as their new breeding ground, especially, on the fringes. So when you see certain birds, like blue jays are a good example because many blue jays are resident, but some migrate, and blue jays are spreading northwestward, kind of toward the Pacific Northwest, where they've never been before.
So I know that we get a lot of migrants on our lake, even though I'm not a birder, just because I know that there's certain times in the spring where all of a sudden there's a ton of birds on the lake and then they go away. So could you give some of our friends in the audience some examples of the kind of birds that we see on our lake?
Yeah, so these were actually my spark birds. I started to notice that we only saw ring-necked ducks in like March and October, and that got me interested in like checking out, why it is we see them, stuff like that. And they're a bird that, breeds up in Canada, northern Canada, and only stops over here briefly. But at this time of year, the last 6-8 weeks or so, we've been seeing hooded mergansers, ring-necked ducks, lots of common mergansers, not huge numbers, but like 6 or 10 over and over a long period. This year, the migration seems to have been drawn out across that species. But also pied-billed grebes, green-winged teals, and occasionally loons pass through here in April also.
Yeah, I love when we all of a sudden hear a loon call every once in a while on the lake. It's really exciting to us because unlike our friends up in Canada, we don't see them locally very often, right?
Right, and 50 to 100 miles north of us is really common to hear loons all year long, but the loon breeding range has really retreated northward because of development in the last several generations or people generations.
Okay, so we talked about how they get more vocal, they get more social, they're eating a lot more to keep up their energy levels for when they're traveling. What happens once they get to their destination? So once they've arrived at their summer homes, let's say, do their behaviors stay the same through the breeding season? I would imagine no. I would imagine once you're breeding and you got babies to take care of, your entire mindset starts to shift, right?
A little bit, but so some birds like waterfowl might already be paired up from last year. And so when they arrive, they're ready to breed right away. Some birds arrive and they have really high site fidelity that they go back to their home. And so immediately when they get there, they have that home sweet home feeling, but they need to settle in and find a mate. So often that kicks off several weeks of breeding behavior. But as soon as they arrive, their behavior changes and it switches from a cooperative flocking mode into a territorial mode, looking for mates too. And they're singing, chasing rivals, and starting to defend prime nesting spots. Some birds, like American kestrels, will even identify a good nesting spot in the fall and then migrate back early in the spring in order to claim that site before other kestrels get to it.
That makes sense.
Yep, and then courtship starts kicking in full blast. Their display behaviors ramp up, their nest building begins, and then their full vocalizations, and they become really important for mate attraction. So for the lucky ones that perfect their song, culmination occurs with copulation.
Let me see if I have this right. It starts with restlessness. There's the night flight calls. There's social flocking and fattening up. And those are kind of all the bird behaviors that are kind of noticeable as the migration season ramps up. And then once they land, they start to shift into breeding and family building mode, right?
Yep, it's game on.
All right.
That's right. So it makes me wonder about our audience. Have any of you noticed any of these migrating behaviors that I've mentioned in your local birds? Let us know in the comments. And if you're interested in setting up your yard for good nesting behavior, now is the time to do it.
So spring migration happens fast, and sometimes life gets in the way, as Dustin is experiencing a little bit with some of your back issues. So to make this featured topic for this week more fun. I had an idea. I challenged Dustin. If you only had one weekend this spring to get out and go birding, how would you plan out that weekend to make sure you were going to get the absolute most you could out of that opportunity?
This is a great challenge because when migration is peaking, a little smart planning can be the difference between an unforgettable weekend or maybe a down period where you feel like you might have missed something. First, my best advice is to put birding into your calendar. Commit yourself to dedicated time and getting a good night's rest to be ready for early morning birding.
All right, and I think that's the key, right? Early morning, but we'll get to that. Okay. All right. So, let's start out with, where would you start? How do you start planning to make sure that you can hit the ground running with this early morning birding that you're talking about?
The first thing for our audience is know that you cannot see everything. Every bird doesn't exist everywhere, right? They live in different habitats and things like that. So target the birds that you have the best shot at seeing that weekend. To do that, you need to start with research. So start by using eBird, the global bird sighting database. I love using eBird bar charts to see which species are most active locally during your specific peak weekend, how those peak timing lines up for your region, and then looking at trends from March to May to pinpoint what is peaking at that time. So I have a tip. First, choose a handful of target species based on the best odds. Then prioritize birds that are exciting and easier to spot, whether they be distinct colors, calls, or behaviors. New birders, this is really easy to do. The more advanced you get, it gets a little bit trickier because you have to decide where to spend your time and make different choices. So I think at this point, we'll do a little on-screen work through to show how we use the eBird bar charts.
Yeah. So instead of just hitting you guys up with some B-roll, we're gonna walk you through a little demonstration of how Dustin would plan for one weekend of spring birding. So let's get set up.
Okay, so here on eBird, I am logged in and I like to go to the Explore menu at the top of the screen. And I think most people jump to the Explore species and Explore regions because they're so highly promoted here. But I like the lesser things, particularly the bar charts. And the bar charts allow you to choose a specific region. So I'm just going to choose the whole state of Massachusetts. And when I continue, it takes a moment to load, but this is going to show me all of the birds that are present in Massachusetts during, this is essentially all time. Okay, so now that it's loaded, this shows every bird and its presence. So for example, snow goose here is mildly present in January, March, and April, and then less so the rest of the year, and then ramps up again in the fall. But what we really want to do is focus on birds that are peaking here in this range. So we see that these aren't really good migratory groups. So I'm going to skip down to the families, particularly the warblers that have really strong migration patterns. So we start to see, so I've scrolled down into the warbler section because those are targets for a lot of birders. I'm going to pick a couple of common ones that are good for all birders and tough to see at other times of year, as well as great birds for new birders. So first off is an American redstart. And the way that this chart works is if there is no green, like in March, there is no presence of that bird in your location. And then each month is divided into 4 equal segments representing the first, second, third, and fourth weeks of that month. And so what we can see is that American redstarts begin to appear the 3rd week of April and then increase into the 4th week of April, 1st week of May, and then they basically peak in the 3rd week of May before they start to decline until fall migration. So American redstart is a really good species to follow right now. Next is the yellow warbler. So we can see those peaking about the 2nd week of May and being really high for 3 straight weeks, actually almost 6 straight weeks before they really decline. Then I want to do a pair of birds that are fun because they're similar but sound very different. And this is the black-throated blue warbler, which we see actually seems to overwinter a little bit. I've never seen one in the winter, but it really has Its peak there in May, particularly the second and third weeks of May. And then I've got it paired with the black-throated green warbler down here, which has a fun call that also really begins to become prominent the last week of April and then present all during May before it really begins to decline for the rest of the year. So those are 4 good birds to target at this time.
Now you've got your target list of birds in your area, and you know they'll be around the weekend that you're planning to do your birding. So is that it? Is that all you need to know? Is your research kind of done at that point?
No, it's only half of it, because you know what you're looking for, but you need to be tuned into the habitats where you can find it. And of those birds, 2 of them are really like forest birds that are usually higher up in the canopy, although the edge of a forest can be a really good spot. Those are the black-throated blue and the black-throated green warblers. So any forested area or even a street along the edge of a large forest would be good for stuff like that. And of course, use eBird to check out hotspots and look at other checklists around that time from other birders that might have been seeing them there already. The other 2, the yellow warbler and the American redstart, they both love edges a lot more. So look for grassy places that have small trees kind of spread out. Cemeteries are good habitats for stuff like that. Grasslands with maybe a meadow with some trees around the edges are really good for those too. The important thing is to target the habitat. So matching that target bird to their preferred habitat, going to those forest edges for warblers. And of course, if you're into shorebirds, and that's a whole nother ball game, make sure you get to mud flats or edges, particularly in between the tides. You really don't want to be there at a totally low tide when birds are kind of resting, or totally high tide when mud flats are kind of filled in, but the middle ground is really the best spot for that. And if you're targeting sparrows, be sure to look for hot spots that are in grasslands. And those can be great for stuff like indigo buntings and eastern towhees.
This is great that you know, like, when these 4 birds are going to hit our area. And you obviously have the experience to know what habitat they're in. But like, so what do? You just go out into a forest and they're going to be there, or?
Well, if you have a spot that is around you, yes, if that's what you would like. But you also can find hotspots on eBird. So here, if I go back into eBird's explore area, you can go to explore hotspots. And you can either look to like if you have a park or a refuge nearby that is probably already in here, you can put in the hotspot you're looking for, or you can drill into your area. So if I'm in Massachusetts, I can drill right in, and every one of these dots is a place where birders have entered records. So let's say that I'm in northeastern Massachusetts and I want to look for stuff. And so here is a wildlife area, right? And you can click on the species found at the Martin Burns Wildlife Management Area, which looks forested and is probably good for some of our target species. So if we were then to say, okay, this is cool, then I want to see what these 192 species are, you can go to view details and it will show you the recent records this month, including new species that haven't been seen, or that have been seen recently but are new to the time period. So there's a number of new ones, as well as recent checklists. So you could check, here's one from today actually with 37 species in it, and you can go into it and see all of the birds that were identified at that local place and see if we have any warblers present. Now, it would be a little early for our target birds, as we just saw, but one of the earlier migrants is a yellow-rumped warbler, and we can see that they're showing up in numbers.
So that number next to it means that's how many of that bird this person saw.
Yes.
Wow.
On that date.
Wow.
Actually, on this checklist.
So they're not, so birders aren't just walking around and being like, okay, I saw a house wren, I saw a song sparrow. They're also counting how many of them they see?
Usually, yes. Sometimes you'll see a record that just has an X on it, and that means they didn't count, but they were present.
Okay. That seems like a lot of information to be capturing as you're walking through the woods. This stresses me out.
Birding is what you want it to be. If your goal is to see a yellow-rumped warbler, great. You could stand there and see a yellow-rumped warbler. And then when you come and put it into eBird, if you want to, you can mark it with an X because you didn't count the number of individuals.
Okay, so you went onto this map and you just selected a location that for this demonstration we're saying is one that you had an interest in potentially going to. And yay, it had one of these birds
Right.
that you wanted to see. But what if you don't have a specific location in mind? Is this map still, or what if you're like, I want to see a yellow-rumped warbler, but you don't know that it's a forest bird? Like, how would you use this map?
Right. So in that case, you wouldn't use the map this way. This is good for finding a hotspot and seeing what's there. If you want to do it that other way, go to the explore area and look for a specific species. So for example, yellow warbler.
Okay.
And then when you put in that species.
Okay.
So for example, if you want to see yellow warbler from the explore menu, you can key in the species that you want and it will give you details about the bird. But as you scroll down, it also shows you the number. So this is really high level data. The number of times it's showing, I'm logged in, so it's showing how many times I've seen yellow warblers and recorded it, how many times all birders have seen it and recorded it. And then this map, again, is showing all of the hotspots where yellow warblers have been reported.
I see.
So you can drill into, sorry, I wasn't very good at centering the map. If we were into that same area of northern Massachusetts, it's taking a second for the data points to load in. There it is. So now it took a minute to load. So here, if we go to the same general area of northeastern Massachusetts where we were, we can see all the locations where that bird has been reported before. And so if we drill in, we can see all of the specific places, and some of them are marked with little fire, meaning it's a hot, it's not just a location, it's a hot spot.
Oh, look at the red one, means recent birding hotspot.
Yeah, so this is a good one. So it's a good example. So if we drill into this one in Cherry Hill, it's where the date isn't shown on this checklist. But we can see, actually what it's showing is a list of everyone who has submitted a yellow warbler sighting from this location, ordered from most recent to least. And the number of them is pretty low. But we can see here, this is a checklist submitted just yesterday with a number of these different birds, including the yellow warbler somewhere. And they've also put in a photo of a gray catbird. But here's the yellow warbler. They not only recorded it, but they put in notes saying that there were 2 yellow warblers. Both of them were singing, and very specific instructions about where the bird was found at the first bend in the path. And another singing where there's an opening in the shrub that looks towards the tree farm just before the chain link fence equipment. So very specific detail was entered by this excellent birder who gave us some information.
Thank you, birder. That's really great. I love that.
So back to, the main topic, we've got a habitat target and species target. We've done our hotspot strategy, targeting hotspots with high species diversity and the birds that we're looking for. And if you're ever not sure, pick a location that has diverse habitats. For example, near us, there's some trails through the woods that lead to a nice big grassland area and then goes downhill to a lake and a marsh, which gets you wetland habitat, forest habitat, edge habitat, and grassland, all in one trip that you could easily do in 30 or 45 minutes. I like to check also, there's a site called birdcast.info that shows the migration paths. So here is Birdcast, which is really great as well. And what this shows you is the migration activity over the last 24 hours basically is shown here. So this was last night, or for tonight, the night of April 26th, is predicting 223 million birds. So what we actually are seeing is a lot of birds that cross the Gulf of Mexico are now hitting in Texas. So it's a really hot area in Texas, but we can see the Mississippi flyway heating up. So they're already seeing lots of migratory birds. But the Atlantic flyway has birds that come across Gulf of Mexico and land in Florida first and then work their way up. So the East Coast trails the Midwest in this way. So referring to birdcast also gives you an idea of when the really good nights are going to be. So another good thing about birdcast is it allows you to see like animations over the last couple of days for your area. And they've taken those animations and the peak dates and pre-mapped them for us. So this map, for example, shows where the peak date is roughly. And so Massachusetts is right here. We're in about May 9th. But what we're going to see is this yellow migration map really light up the East Coast over the nights over the next couple of weeks.
All right. So I just thought of a question for you. So you, for our demonstration for our audience, had selected like 4 birds, right? To kind of walk them through and show them how you would plan. What if you're like a beginner birder, and you're trying to pick out your target birds for your birding weekend? Are there certain types of birds that are like hard to bird that you would recommend that beginners avoid during spring migration season, or does it not matter?
It doesn't not matter, but I wouldn't say avoid any particular species. If it's a difficult species that's hard to come by in your area, like for us, hooded warblers are difficult to find because they usually only come up to about New Jersey. But every couple of years, a hooded warbler shows up, or some of them show up in the Northeast. I just would say have additional, like think of your targets as like, say, A-level birds and B-level birds, and you're going for the A, but if you don't get it, shoot for the stars and see what you find along the way also. Make sure you have kind of a mix of birds that are more common and difficult to find. And when you miss something, it's not a big deal, right? It gives you something else to look for tomorrow. And then lastly, have a backup plan. So especially for beginning birds, remember, they don't always cooperate. Birds don't read maps, and birds move along all the time, so flexibility matters. Adjust for weather and migration conditions according to what you've seen in Birdcast, and have some secondary or even tertiary locations to scope out in case plan A isn't productive. And if you go to a really busy, popular place, have a plan B in case there's no parking. You simply can't get in there. Like going to, say, Mount Auburn Cemetery at peak migration, parking is definitely a challenge, so plan accordingly.
The challenge I gave you was, okay, if you only had one weekend for birding, how would you go about this? But how much of this do you actually do before you go birding? Or do you just go out there to see what you see?
I do most of it. If I had only one weekend, I would definitely spend more time in preparation. Like I said, especially getting good sleep, being like committed and having your mind dedicated to, getting up at 5 a.m. to be at the great places by 6 a.m. or something is really good. But pack smart. Of course, you need your optics, whatever you're bringing, binoculars, camera, anything like that. So have stuff packed and ready to go. Like to lay out my clothes in the morning so I can sleep as much as possible and just like roll out of bed and get my stuff on, including my birding gear. If you can have that stuff packed up in the car the night before, all the better. But be sure to bring your guide or your app. Be sure to bring your phone charger if you need that, because you might be using Merlin a lot, that kind of stuff. And then according to the weather, right? If you need a hat, I actually like hats a lot for birding because the sun is always low in the sky, and having the visor really helps. I use my binoculars and my glasses a lot, and I like my hat because it's an easy place to put my glasses when I'm not birding. I don't have to kind of fumble trying to get them in my shirt or in a pocket or something like that. So be prepared about whatever your mechanics are for birding. And of course, bring water and a small snack. If the birding's really good, you're not going to want to leave. And maybe don't drink too much either if the place you're going doesn't have a bathroom, or have a plan for that too. In addition, peak times is, sunrise to 9 a.m. Things start to slow down between 9 or 10, but in heavy migration times, you certainly can see birds at other times of day. But also plan for late afternoon birding because they get active again before the sun goes down. Watch the global and the regional weather because that sometimes will determine what's happening. If there's a storm coming up the East Coast, sometimes they push birds through your area faster than expected, or sometimes they create places for birds to stall, and they might not get there early. So even though the peak for yellow warblers might be the third week of third week of May, the weather might push them up early or delay them by a few days. So watch out for that kind of stuff as well. Sudden fallouts of birds can occur where the weather pushes them, or they get to an edge where they really build up. For example, in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, they get up there and they don't want to cross over Lake Michigan into Canada. So there's places up there that giant volumes of birds just land and stick around for days or even a couple of weeks before they want to make the leap over Lake Michigan. And then lastly, stay focused. Stick with your handful of target species. Spend some time knowing and learning their calls so that when you get there, you might hear them before you see them, which is fun. And don't get overwhelmed by trying to chase every rare sighting that you hear about. You're going to have other opportunities for those rare sightings. Don't miss seeing out 15 new life birds just because you were chasing a rare bird that you heard about.
All right. So then it really does sound like, if you do your homework, if you go on Birdcast, if you go on eBird and kind of come up with this plan, but remain flexible once you're out there, you probably could have a really good time birding in just a weekend.
For sure. What I'm curious about is what my fellow birders in our audience would do. If you had just one weekend to bird during spring migration, where would you go? Or what's your dream migration bird to see this year? Let us know in the comments. We'd love to hear your plans and your strategies.
And now it's time for our nest box updates because tis the season for nest boxes in our area. And in this segment, which will be running for the next couple of months at least, we'll be sharing what's happening in our local birdhouses as spring migration kicks into high gear. So as a reminder to the audience, we are tracking wood ducks, bluebirds, and tree swallows throughout the season, and we'll be bringing you highlights every week. So Dustin, let's start with our wood duck boxes. Let's talk about some of those key developments, like what kind of eggs are laying, what hatchling dates might be approaching, the behaviors of the hen, any concerns or any activities that are notable that you're seeing for this week. And I believe you even have a fancy schmancy Gantt chart that you can share with us. Is that correct?
I do.
All right, so let's get to it.
All right. Last time I showed you simply that I had established a Gantt chart because it was a dorky thing where I wanted to see how consistent she was at when she visits the nest. And at that point, I said that we would start seeing full-time incubation at any time now. And this actually was the first night. So these green marks indicate when the hen was present in the nest, and gray indicates half-hour time periods when she was not present in the nest. And so what we were expecting to see is a transition from times when she was mostly not in the nest to being in the nest. And she spent a couple of nights, but then was away from the nest during the day. And so this is when we saw her full-time incubation start around April 15th. And then her rest times started to become really, really consistent, especially in the morning. Look at these times. She left the nest for her break at 6:04, 5:52, 5:50, 5:45, 5:49, 5:52, 5:46, and 5:50. So essentially all within the same 15-minute period. And this is for a bird that does not wear a watch.
Well, the lady has to take a morning bathroom break.
Yes, but even her returns were remarkably consistent. This first day was the longest break, but she's been returning at 7:04, 6:55, 6:55, 7:23, 7:05, 7:11, 7:02, remarkably consistent where that break is happening. And we're seeing now that she's about 10 days into the full incubation period. This will be a 30-day incubation, so we expect a likely hatch date around May 15th.
Okay. I see that we have a battery issue that popped up.
We do. And I need to get out there today before 6 o'clock in order to replace the batteries.
Okay. And that's something that just pops up from time to time, right? And
Yes.
you just have to replace the
And
batteries and that's it.
Yes. And I know I need to get there back by 6 o'clock because, look at when she takes her break times. Usually she's out of the nest from 4:30 till returning between 6:30 and 7 o'clock.
Got it. And you can usually hear her when she flies off because one of this nest box is not far from our house, right? That's why it works, because the camera has access to our Wi-Fi.
Yes, when it has batteries.
When it has batteries, right. And does she always make that song or whatever, that vocalization when she flies away from the box?
Usually, yes.
Okay. What does it sound like?
It's sort of like a whistle, like a alarm whistle, like I can't produce that for you.
Is she like calling for her friends? Like, hey guys, I got a break.
Kind of, yes.
Okay. All right, cool. All right. So she's incubating. She's very consistent on when she's taking her bathroom breaks. Are those also the times when, like, how is she eating?
She's eating while she's out of the nest. That's it.
And that's it?
That's it. Twice a day.
Oh, that's the worst.
She has to hold it too. She eats and goes to the bathroom during her break, but she's not going to the bathroom in the nest during this whole sort of 10 to 12 hour period.
She's a good mama.
She is. And we have some videos to show you as well that show her preparing to leave the nest and covering up her eggs on both sides and working her way all around so that the down is fully covering the eggs while she's gone. Seeing her leave the nest, and then when she returns and she checks on them and removes the down and really settles herself down onto the clutch to keep them warm for the night.
And those down feathers are coming from her, correct?
Yeah, she plucks them from her own breast.
Ouch. Okay. Wow, she really is super mama.
Well, yeah, a lot of birds also, they synchronize their own molting with this process so that they're not going to be flying much while they're caring for their babies, so they're able to grow their new birds at that time. Canada geese, for example, go through a flightless period where they can barely fly, if at all, while they're caring for their babies.
Okay. Any concerns? Anything else of note going on, or is it like smooth sailing right now?
Smooth sailing for this hen right now. The other box that I have a camera in hasn't really had any activity, and it's getting late. I'm starting to worry that box number 2 probably will not have a wood duck in it this year.
Okay. All right. Well, you win some, you lose some, right?
Yep. I do have 8 more out on the lake. They just don't have cameras, and I haven't been able to get in the kayak and get around to there because of my health situation. So,
got it. Okay. Anything else of note that you want to cover for our audience for this week's update on wood ducks, or should we move on to bluebirds?
Let's move on to bluebirds. So it's a little bit early in the season for bluebirds, but because they're not migratory, they are already in full nesting progress. I have a photo here of 2 bluebird eggs that are the first eggs in our nest boxes. The the bluebird trail that I have has 16 boxes on it. Right now, 3 of them have bluebird nests that are either complete or nearing completion. And this is the only one that has eggs yet. As of Thursday evening, it was 2 eggs. And so I expect that to probably be a full clutch by now. And I expect that bluebird will begin incubating if she hasn't already. And given those dates, those bluebirds would be hatching around May 10th to 15th, in that range. And then lastly, the tree swallows have really just arrived in the last couple of weeks, and they're only just beginning to defend some nest boxes. So they're really active, but their schedule is a bit later. I usually have a first egg for them around May 10th or 15th. So we'll be seeing them in future updates.
All right. So that is all for today's episode. But before we head off on our next adventure, this is just a quick reminder that you can find Dustin's wildlife photography and links to our content channels on our website, hikeandhearth.com.
Yep. We love being part of the YouTube nature community. So keep sharing your comments on your experiences with birding, nature, and conservation. And if you're not already subscribed, let's fix that problem.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've mentioned our Substack before. Typically, we post a summary of our podcast on Fridays, the day after our podcast episode drops. We are going to be adding an additional article on Tuesdays that will be a more detailed journey into our Nestbox Chronicles. So you'll get some details there as well as photographs and video clips and everything. And be sure you're subscribing to our YouTube channel as well. But now that I've made my final pitch of the weekly podcast episode, Dustin, are you ready to send us off for the day?
I sure am. So until next time, friends, keep your eyes on the skies and your hearts in the wild.
Bye, everyone.